Hey everybody, good morning and welcome to a brand new episode of the Console Log, episode number 55. That's 55 to put it together and you get 10. I am joined as always with my faithful co-host Matthew Gerstmann. Hello Matthew.
Hi everyone. When you said everybody, it sounded like the intro to the Space Jam theme, and now I'm playing that in my head. So everybody get up. It's time to slam now. Let's cue the music.
Everybody get up, it's time to slam now. We got the real jam going down. Welcome to the Space Jam. Here's your chance, do your dance at the Space Jam. Alright.
That works for me.
That was a good one. Cool. So hey Harry, I'm in Italy right now. I am on the last week of my foreign vacation before I come back to the States. And you know what they have lots of in Italy?
What's that?
They have lots of artwork, and they have a certain kind of artwork here.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Now I see what you're doing.
Yeah. So it's called a mosaic. Yeah, it's a piece of art made from assembling small pieces of glass, stone, or other materials. So says Google, and you know why that's relevant to our faithful listeners.
They are on. They're holding their bated breath, waiting to hear the answer.
It's because they still need to support Mosaic, which was released 25 years ago. Mosaic, yes. So 25 years ago, as of today, the 11th, or no, not today's no longer the 11th. I don't know how dates work anymore. But anyway, 25 years ago, Mosaic 1.0 came out, and that was the beginning of the web. I also saw a super cool tweet that said, 25 years after the first light bulb, 99% still didn't have electricity. 25 years after film was invented, 100% of films were silent. And 25 years after TV was invented, 100% of broadcasts were black and white. For the web, it's still the beginning, and the best is yet to come.
And without the web, we wouldn't be here today. So thanks, Mosaic, for starting everything. I'm sure if you tried, you could find an old version to either download, or I'm sure someone has made a replication in the browser, because there's nothing like modernity where you can relish in nostalgia via consuming a browser in your browser.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, what more do you want than Windows 95 running IE in your newest browser?
I mean, that's where all the best
You know
dev
what was
tools
one of
are
the best
nowadays.
follow-ups I saw to this? When did the web switch from gray to white?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, remember? It used to be gray.
Yeah, that's kind of like a reverse aging process.
Yeah, kind of like the web.
Yeah. Moving on, we had some pretty big news in the world of GraphQL, everybody's favorite replacement for REST. Unless it's not, then it's not your favorite, but that's neither here nor there. GraphQL was a technology started by Facebook using that's now been spread and open sourced. And this past week, they announced that they are creating a GraphQL Foundation to be the steward of the GraphQL project, which is very exciting because it takes the ownership a little bit away from Facebook, which is good to have it be not dependent upon just one company. So they're announcing the intent to form the GraphQL Foundation in partnership with the Linux Foundation. Facebook and nearly a dozen other companies are doing this. So this is exciting because it means that there's a broader and bigger future ahead for GraphQL.
Yeah, it's very cool to see just the backing of this thing grow over time. I'm excited for the day that I finally have an excuse to use it in production, which has not happened to me yet.
And I will say, I think it's kind of interesting the timing for this announcement, because one of the initial creators of GraphQL was a fellow by the name of Lee Byron, who recently left Facebook. Actually, he went to Robinhood, and I definitely can imagine a scenario in which he wanted to retain some influence on GraphQL whilst not working at Facebook. So this was definitely a way to do that. Not to say that there's any nefarious plans, but it's, having left the embrace of Facebook, you start realizing that you need to have things be a little bit decentralized. So
Sounds
I can definitely see that
sounds
being.
very philanthropic. You know who used to be philanthropic? Robin Hood.
Who?
He stole from the rich and gave to the poor.
And
And
now he's
that's
just stealing your money and giving it to the stock market.
yeah, I guess I don't know, but yeah. And speaking of ancient things, you know where else I've been in recent history, Harry, is Greece. And I was on this island called Delos, which is dedicated to a certain sun god. Do you see where I'm going now? Now you see? Maybe I don't
This
know.
is so many
Anyway,
steps. Please
it's,
go on. Yeah, I
dedicated to
see.
Apollo, which is the most popular implementation of GraphQL, at least for the open source community. And the Apollo team are putting out the GraphQL platform. So they are now doing a form of GraphQL as a service, and there's all sorts.
Mm, I'm not,
You
they're
you fix
providing
it.
services for GraphQL. I think this is if you use GraphQL in the open source world, you have two options. You have the open source things that Facebook has open source. You also have Apollo, which is their implementation of the GraphQL spec. Uh, Apollo is funded by the Meteor Group. The Meteor Group is the people who made um, Meteor.
They just
Well
came
named.
crashing in.
Yeah, just like a star. And they've been working on Apollo for the past, gosh, I don't know, 2+ years. And they're introducing the Apollo GraphQL platform, which is, in all honesty, their first attempt to make money off of Apollo. Which is no shame in that, because if they can't make money off of Apollo, then they won't be able to continue supporting the open source work on there. So this is good. It's good to be able to make money off of open source. They have some things that are not open source, but that's just things that more enterprise companies may want. And frankly, them having better support for enterprise requirements is just a great thing for GraphQL as a community, because enterprise needs are vastly different than startups' individual needs. And having an actual answer for that means that there is a higher chance that GraphQL can be adopted wider across the ecosystem.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. What was that?
That was me being exhausted from saying so many words in such rapid succession,
You
and
did
it was
say a
just
lot
me
of
like,
words. At least you stopped me from rambling incorrectly, because I would have gotten a lot of things wrong.
I
Yeah.
mean, I'm definitely very excited about GraphQL. I play with it in my free time, so I have a vested interest to read every little word and character that they say. But let's not redux this conversation any further and talk about React Redux announced a new version. What version was that, Matthew?
It was 6.0.0 beta/1 hyphen 1.
You are all over the map
I
right
am
now. This
all over the
occasion is
map.
going
I don't know
straight.
what's happening. This morning I climbed a mountain and then got on a plane, and now I'm out of it. But anyway, React
That sounds
Redux.
like a weird open source project.
You know what? It will be one day. React Redux is working on version 6.0.0. The biggest thing here is they are supporting the latest and greatest features in React. They are going to use new context, which will eventually allow for async rendering. Also, as a result of this, they now require React 16.4. This shouldn't be too much of an issue, because really there's no new features that you're getting from React Redux that you don't need React 16.4 to take advantage of. So really, it's just it's almost a compatibility update, but it should take advantage of the latest and greatest rendering engine and Fiber and all of those other cool things soon to come.
Yeah, this is definitely React Redux getting their ducks in a row as they try to keep in pace with the React Core React.
Those Redux
Core.
ducks, man, they're always in a row.
Oh yeah.
They line up, they go on stages, they go stage 0, and then 1, and then 2, and then 3. No, actually, I'm thinking of how TC39 works. And speaking of which, MDN is starting to document the stage 3 class field proposal, which I actually read this and then was kind of surprised that this wasn't already built in, because I think that I just used this I think this is one of those things that's so easy to transpile that we've all been using it forever. And I did not realize that it was only stage 3. Harry, do you want to explain it a little more in detail?
So the class fields proposal is the syntax. It's new syntax for ECMAScript that allows you to have the nice way, if you use React, to do state equals an object. Essentially, it's a way for you to define properties on a class instance inline in the class without requiring to define it in the constructor. So if you've used React, you've been using this for a while because it's a very popular transform. I'm sure with Angular, you've also been using this because TypeScript has support for this. It's one of those proposals that I think people take for granted because it's, I don't want to say obvious, but it is in some ways obvious and such a required nicety that not having it makes things a lot more cumbersome. And MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network, the go-to place for all your documentation about ECMAScript, is now starting to actually document this proposal, which maybe a little bit chicken before the egg, but I think there's also just more proof about how confident people are about this proposal. It's in stage 3. The next step is stage 4. Then it's final. I don't think that's going to change, but now you actually have an official place to actually read about what that means and how to use it.
I've been using this feature forever to the point where I like had no idea that I thought this was just like straight up like ES6, like ES 2015 class fields.
No, the reason why it's been done so carefully is because it has implications when you start talking about private class properties, when you start talking about decorators. All these proposals have effects on each other, so I think they've been careful in figuring out how to develop them and define them such that they can work in concert. It's like working on a big epic, like a big project, and trying to have people working in parallel, but there is some coordination required, which means that things take a little bit slower in some. So that's kind of the easy way to look at it. Because I mean, it's a big epic trying to add more features to ES6 to ES classes. So this is probably the first one that's reaching the finish line first.
Yeah.
And then speaking of finish lines, we talked about this last week. Prettier had a PR adding support for HTML, Vue, and Angular. And this past week, they actually released it. So you can actually use it. So if you actually are using HTML, Actually, do you use HTML anymore, Matthew?
I mean, occasionally. I don't know.
Really?
I
think, when's the last time you opened up a .html file?
You know what? I have an HTML file that I need for a very stupid personal project involving a security camera outside my apartment. But it is an HTML file.
Yeah, I don't think I've opened an HTML file in a long time. It's always been like Create React App or something like that, where I just have a .js file. So you are more of a web developer than I am.
I go way back, man. I was writing JavaScript in the 90s. I was a child, but for some reason I thought JavaScript would be fun.
Yeah, I remember it just as DHTML.
I do remember that too.
Speaking of things that, I don't know, speaking of whatever. Next thing, this is just a PSA. If you are using Webpack, by default, it has an uglifier that uses uglifier-es as the minifier. It's not maintained anymore, and it has bugs. So this is a PSA. Just check your Webpack configs. If you're using a Webpack minifier that's using uglify-es, migrate off to Terser, which is a maintained version that actually understands ES plus features a little bit better and knows how to minify them without having bugs. This kind of bubbled up in the ecosystem with React having a production-only bugs from React users, and they eventually found the issue being the uglifier. So as web applications get more complex, you got to test more areas of your stack to see where things may be coming from.
I mean, I can't repro it in my dev environment, so is it really a bug?
I mean, I'm sure people will love to hear that.
Anyway, so I don't actually know who these two individuals are, but they have so Rick Waldron and Boz Sender. I hope I'm saying your.
That's a cool last name.
It's a cool first name. What are you, Boz? B-O-A-Z?
He's the CEO.
Yeah. Anyway, they are working on a cool new project called Test262, which provides JavaScript developers with up-to-date information on the state of new and existing language features across JavaScript implementations. So when we say JavaScript implementations, we mean your actual in-browser implementation. So Chrome has V8. I think Safari is the one that uses SpiderMonkey. There's JavaScript Core. There's Chakra Core, which is what Edge uses.
Nope. You're mixed up. SpiderMonkey is Firefox. JavaScript Core is Safari. Chakra Core is Edge.
Cool. I mixed two of those up. Thank you for fixing that. Anyway, so they have put out a new test suite that is constantly running against master on all of these JavaScript engines to determine what features are readily available. And then they intend to use that data to work with the Babel and TypeScript teams so that way they can consume this data and then be compiling the smartest code possible for actual end user use. So as many of you know or have experienced in the past, you often have to compile the newest code to something that looks like ES5 just because not all browsers support that. And now there is a definitive source of truth that is part of the ECMAScript organization, or the ECMA organization, which actually manages ECMAScript, which will give you the answer as to what engines support what.
Yeah, it's if you've ever used caniuse.com, it's a great way to know what you can actually use in your day job for features in terms of CSS, JavaScript. Test 262 aims to be the can I use for Babel and TypeScript amongst other tools. So a little low level, but it's kind of neat to see having there be a canonical source of truth for these things, and hopefully encouraging them to be more true to each other.
Yeah, and I mean, this can I use could just consume this data also.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had to say goodbye to an old friend recently.
I mean, it might be premature.
Yeah, it is. Their name is Electron. Yeah. So anyway, David Nowicki, I hope I said your name right, who is a front-end engineer at Amazon, wrote a blog post called "Goodbye Electron: Hello Desktop PWAs," which stands for Progressive Web Apps, which are web apps that function well off of the internet. So basically, that Electron isn't actually being sunsetted or anything like that. It's just that the latest version of Chrome across all the major OSs, so version 70 on Linux and Windows, and then 72 on Mac OS, is getting support for PWAs, where you can kind of appify a progressive web app. So the first likely candidates will be like Gmail and Google Calendar that you can run as an actual application on your computer. One of the cool things here is that it still runs in a process like a single tab would in Chrome. So as a result of that, it only needs to run one version of the V8 runtime, I believe, which means it uses significantly less memory than the Electron version would. So anyway, it's a kind of cool new change. Were you going to correct something, Harry?
No, I was going to say it's easy. Like, so if you have an Android phone or even an iOS phone, you have the ability to make a app out of a web page. Android has better support for this with PWAs because they have more APIs that are exposed, so you can access more hardware-specific technologies. This is kind of the same idea where you can create a progressive web app on your desktop via Chrome. So it's neat. It's definitely a more smaller audience because it requires to use this requires you to have the latest version of Chrome, and also your app has to actually meet a checklist of features that actually designate it as a progressive web app, such as being served over HTTPS. It also has to have a service worker installed. So there's definitely, it's not for free, but it's definitely a way that if you want to have, I think your example of Gmail is great. Like if I can have Gmail as a progressive web app in a separate tab, I'm happy as a duck in water getting rained on with a rainbow overhead and a song.
There was some duck that 150 people went to Central Park to go see because it's some rare duck that doesn't come out very often.
Yeah, I did not see it because I don't care. Moving on, Cloudflare is a CDN that lets you store and serve up your content very quickly. Had a very interesting blog post this past week about cloud computing without containers. You may be familiar with the serverless design of serverless architecture where you can kind of host just code in the cloud and everything's managed for you. There's a few problems with serverless in the fact that it can be actually slow because of the containerized nature of running your code. This blog post by Cloudflare talks about their other solution for having this cloud computing at large called Workers, which is their marketing term for it. But this blog post is actually pretty technical and talks about how they actually use V8 directly, V8 being the JavaScript interpreter for Chrome, And V8 has this feature called, where is it? I'm trying to find the name of it. It's called isolates. V8 has this thing called isolates, and they are essentially the primitives that V8 uses when it actually runs your code on a web page, such that if you have like multiple iframes on a page, V8 will create multiple isolate instances and run your code in there such that they're all sandbox and not going to talk to each other. Long story short, Cloudflare is using V8 isolates to easily and quickly run your code in the cloud with less cold start spin-up time and just better usage of the actual hardware. So it's just an interesting approach they took. There's another tweet that we have linked in the show notes about the ramifications of this from the CTO of NPM, how they actually currently use this to run arbitrary code in the cloud at large scale, which NPM has. So I encourage you to read it. I found it fascinating. It's not too low level that me being just a front end engineer wouldn't understand, but it's definitely just interesting.
Yeah, another really interesting thing is how and why things happen. So there is a really great Medium post called "The How and Why on React's Usage of Linked List in Fiber to Walk the Components Tree," and it's a very in-depth article on how Fiber works under the hood and how it does work in these time slices, which we've all been very excited about. So this individual who gave themselves the title Max Wizard of the Web, which I am impressed by, posted a ton of good links to articles explaining how Fiber works, along with his kind of explanation of it. A lot of this takes advantage of a brand new feature called Request Idle Callback, which is pretty cool. That is a global queuing function in newer browsers. And what's also pretty nifty is I was digging through the Fiber source myself, and I discovered that there's this one comment that's everything below here is a polyfill for Request Idle Callback. So they're really leveraging this new feature, which pretty much just allows React to do work while the browser is idle. And it has these chunks of work in the form of a linked list. It walks the tree and then puts them in a list so that it can just be yep, that's the next thing I need to do. And then whenever the browser's hey, I need a minute to render, it's just okay, we're going to pause. Read the article for a lot more depth and charts and graphs and code. That is my short explanation of Fiber, which is also good for your diet.
Good going. You know what else is good for your diet? Performance. So let's finish this episode off with a lovely blog post from the ever prolific Adi Osmani from Google. He has a wonderful blog post called a Netflix Web Performance Case Study, where he does a case study on how Netflix was super focused on making their logged out experience as quick as possible. Netflix uses React. They've used React for their logged out page. However, they wanted to increase signups and just people actually becoming Netflix customers. And as people have known from tests and studies that Amazon has done, and also Google has done, the faster the web page is, the more likely people will actually interact and use it. So this is a blog post about how they analyzed their page, seeing where things were slow, and also talking about their solution, which was getting rid of their framework being React and actually just using vanilla JavaScript. This is definitely a bespoke solution for Netflix themselves because there's a finite amount of JavaScript they actually had to re-input themselves, such as a carousel. But it's just, it's interesting to see people find solutions to problems outside of just using a framework, that you can still just use vanilla JavaScript, and that is fine. And they had great success.
Yeah. Also, do consider if you ever need to operate at this scale. This is a really interesting study by Netflix about how they used Vanilla.js, and this is really valuable if you're working at a bigger company or just at a company that serves many, many users. But just consider the number of people hitting your site. It's usually worth the trade-off to just use a framework in advance, whether that is React or Angular or the Vue over there. I don't know, but this is just as a word of caution. This is not an argument not to use frameworks. It is something very specific to Netflix's needs.
And that is your Consulog episode.
You know
We
I got my joke segment. It's like why I'm here, and
I was trying to skip it.
you're getting three. It's always
I'm getting
three.
three.
Yeah. So the first one is what gives you butterflies every single time, no matter how many times you experience it.
Toast?
Buying caterpillars.
Buying caterpillars. Unless they die.
Okay, fine. Okay.
Death will end that joke.
Okay, fine. The next one is how much does a trip to Spain cost?
Nothing if you're dead.
Well, it depends on where you live. For example, if you live in Spain, then it's free also.
Or if you're dead.
And then I guess that works too. And then my last joke, my last Matthew joke for the episode is I like to say that I live for two reasons. First one is I was born. The second one is I haven't died yet.
Wow, really? Is that your joke?
Yeah.
It's about death? Wow. How'd that happen?
I don't know.
Man.
You did it.
Yeah, I really killed it.
Yeah.
Ha.
I stole all these jokes from a BuzzFeed article about literal jokes. I always steal my jokes from somewhere on the internet. Although, is it stealing if you cite your sources? I don't know.
Also, if you tweet at Matthew and he likes the joke, he will say it in the
It is
episode.
extremely likely that I will tell your joke in the episode, and I will give you credit for it.
Yeah.
We're gonna link to this BuzzFeed article because
Even
it's a thing we discussed.
even if the joke is not usually up to Matthew's snuff, just because you tweeted at him, I'm sure he'll include it.
It's every time someone tweets at me, I get butterflies.
Unless they're dead. Unless they're dead caterpillars.
I mean,
All right, is that gonna be the title of the episode? Dead caterpillars. It's a horrible title. All right, that was your episode number 55, past week, November 7th to November 13th. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you are a subscriber. If you're not, please become a subscriber. Tell your friends, tell your loved ones, tell your relatives, tell your enemies, and most of all, tell your coworkers, because hopefully this helps your job.
yeah.
Any last words, Matthew?
I am gonna go eat some pizza.
Nice. I'm going to have some more coffee. Bye, everybody. See you again next week.